Alright, this is a map review of Gullywash. I'm not going to be going over specific plays on Gullywash, rather I'm going to go over the fundamental positioning advantages on this map. I'm going to go over each point, and on each point I'm going to cover the good places to fight from, the bad places to fight from, the ultimate sort of positioning you want to control if you can, the good doorways to push through into the point, and the good doorways to leave from on that point. So starting off on mid, the only really good place to fight from is right here. The reason being, you have a ton of vision, you have a little bit of cover, you can put pressure on the only significant high ground on the mid, and you have a lot of space to dodge around in. You also have commanding presence over a lot of the mid, because more than half this mid's on low ground. So speaking of that, one of the bad places to fight is down here. While you do have a ton of space down here, you don't have a lot of ability to pressure the high ground, and you also are pretty blind from the entire other low ground as well as everything above you. So the only real benefit to this is the space you have, but you're going to lose if you linger down here for too long. Another bad place to fight from is back here. The reason being, you're in a box, you have less vision, so you can't see things going down or going on down there as much. And you're also further from this high ground, so if the other team takes that, there's not a lot you can do to push them off of it, and they're just going to spam you out eventually. You're also closer to all these flank routes from drop down and elbow and banana. I don't actually know if those are the names of elbow and banana. So you're basically asking to be collapsed on if you're lingering in this area. Moving on to the best position to control, I kind of went over it already, but this point is the only significant high ground on this point. So while you're easily spammed off from here, assuming the other team is playing in good spots, if you can control this area, it means the other team is pretty much going to be forced out. So if you own this point, it means you own the mid, most likely. Good doorways to push into mid from. There's 3 doorways: big door, drop down, and choke. Drop down is very rare, but I'll mention it. Choke is sort of the passive doorway, and I say passive, but it's still a pretty dangerous doorway, because as you see, when you enter choke, you're in this really cramped spot. There's tons of blind corners where hiders could surprise you, or you could eat a trap. However, if you can get through this little bottleneck, you're pretty far away from where the other team is going to be holding. That's why it's the passive choke, because the enemy team can't exert a ton of pressure onto you when you're moving through this area, assuming you have some sort of advantage that they're scared of, like an Uber or player ad. So you choose this doorway when you basically have extra time to burn to cautiously clear corners and check for traps, and you want to get through without having to use your Uber. There's another trap spot or a hiding spot there. A more aggressive doorway is big door, and funnily enough, big door has a much bigger choke, so it's actually easier to initially get through this big door without using. However, once you do get through big door, you're on low ground, and your only routes to high ground are through these tiny corridors. On top of that, you're a lot closer to where the enemy team is going to be holding, most likely, so they're going to be able to exert a lot more pressure on you. So when you go big door, you're most likely intending to use Uber, because you're trying to catch them with your advantage. You could also use this as a passive doorway if you intend to go left instead, so that's actually an option. Lastly, if you want to go drop down, it's not a great play unless you think it'll surprise the enemy team, because as you can see from up here, you can't really see drop down. So basically you might go drop down if you think they're not watching it and you want to take like a really aggressive Uber or just a ton of space without them seeing it, because you might be able to get to like here before they spot you. Cool. Doorways to leave from. Pretty much the only doorway you would choose to leave from on mid is choke. The reason being, you can still exert a decent amount of pressure on the doorways the enemy team might come in from, mainly big door. Their own choke is kind of far, so you can't do a lot, but you could be tanking someone on the point and still kind of staying back. And you're still in this sort of high ground. So it is rather passive, but the alternative of big door is pretty much horrible. The reason being, if you want to leave big door, you've lost complete control over all the other chokes on the mid, so there's no reason to even really be here because you can't do anything to stop them from coming in. You might as well just leave. So if you want to exert any amount of pressure onto this point while you're leaving, you'd want to be leaving choke. And you can get out to your own second relatively successfully. Obviously there's still danger of being flanked big door, but yeah. Okay, moving on to 2. The only really notable good spot on 2 is up here. It's the main high ground on the whole point. You have fantastic vision of everything near you. It's most of the high ground on the point, except that little strip up there, and you have lots of space to move around, and you're not cramped when you're up here. So if you can ever control this area, you're probably going to win your fight, assuming everything else is even. Another okay spot to fight from is here. The reason being, you have okay vision, and you have a lot of space to play around with, and you can exert some pressure on this high ground. It's not as good as that because, well, you're on low ground, and you're blind to river, so you could be surprised by a lot of things coming around that river corner. So generally, you don't want to linger here, but you could move through here and potentially pressure them off that high ground if they only have that. But in general, if you are fighting the other team when they're on that high ground, you're going to lose. But it's not the worst position on the point. The worst position on this point is right here. The reason being, you're the most blind. You have a ton of blind corners and chokes all around you that you can be surprised by. You're surrounded by oppressive high ground, not to mention you're completely blind to the high ground above you, so you could just be ultra mulched and collapsed on from here. So this is the spot you don't want to fight on. If you're here, you just leave. Like, you don't want to fight from here, because to get to high ground, you have to go all the way across this to that and loop around. So you're so very far from high ground the whole time you're here. So any team that controls these areas is going to make your life hell. So when talking about doorways in and out of 2, it's rather complicated because you have both the defenders moving out of 2 as well as the aggressors moving out of 2 and both teams moving into 2. But I'll start with the team on offense pushing into 2. You generally have 2 main doorways you want to go. Choke is the passive doorway. The reason being, you're very far from all the high ground that the other team could theoretically pressure you from, so you're not going to feel as much pressure as you walk through this choke, and you have a lot of space to move around in and a decent amount of vision. But the most important thing is you're far away from where the other team can hold. The other doorway to push through is here, and this is the aggressive doorway. It's aggressive because you're very close to where the enemy team can be holding. In fact, you can even cut them off, and like you're almost pushing last when you push big door into 2. So you're very deep when you go this doorway. However, as I just mentioned earlier, you're in the worst spot to fight on this whole point. So generally, if you're going this way, you're going to use, because you never want to hang out here. So you might use to try and catch them up here, or you might use to try and catch some players up here. So this is not a doorway you take and try and milk generally. You can even go through baby door and try and cut them off in last. You could be that aggressive. On the defender side, pushing into 2, you're pretty much always going to be up here. The reason being, it's a direct route from your last to high ground onto 2. You have decent vision. You can exert some pressure over there, and you can really lock out big door. So this is the safest spot to pressure into 2 from on defense, but you are still rather blind from this area, so it's still a little bit dangerous. Leaving 2 from the offensive position, generally you're going to leave choke, and the reason being, you can still put out some pressure onto this high ground while you leave safely. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you were to leave big door, you're generally not expecting to put out much pressure, especially if they go river. There's not really anything you can do about that. The only reason I would choose to go this way is if you're basically running for your life and trying to meet up with your spawners as soon as possible. From the defender's perspective, it's the same as the door they push through. You leave from up here. Again, it's the high ground that links you to your last. You can still exert the most amount of pressure on all the high ground as you leave. So if you're trying to get out and still get some pressure out, you would go this way. Oh, one more thing. Kind of already went over this, but this is the position to control. Obviously, it's the best place to fight in, but also if you own this area, you probably own two. So that should be your goal in any team fight, is to take control of this high ground. All right, moving on to last. So last has two okay spots, or rather one good spot and one okay spot to fight on. This is the really good spot up here. The reason is you have the most amount of space, you have high ground over this pit, you even have a little bit of high ground over that, and you have pretty good vision over everything, and you have control of a spawn door. So on last, this is the ultimate position to fight in, and control is up here. You can fight from here, but it's a really poor version of that over there. It's some high ground, but it's, you know, very cramped. You can be flanked from river very quickly, but you do have control over spawn door and high ground over the pit area. Usually defenders will be like forced onto this high ground, so aggressors probably want to take that high ground with their Uber. Bad places to fight is pretty much anywhere in this pit. The further back, the worse it is. You're surrounded by high ground, you know, that's most of it. There's not much more to say. It's a little bit cramped, especially as you move back here. Like if you're almost near this choke, your back's to the wall, you could even be juggled around, so it's pretty bad. Good doorways to push through. So because this last is so small, pretty much every doorway is an aggressive doorway. There's not really a milk option into this last. The only reason you choose one versus the other is depending on where the other team's holding or where you want to end, or just to mix it up. But pretty much every doorway you're popping immediately. And obviously there's no doorways to leave on last because it's the defender's death if they leave last. Okay. That wraps up Gully.